Welcome, everyone. All right, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us today for our Nonviolence Cafe on protecting land protectors to help mark Earth Day tomorrow on April 22nd. Interpretation services are available in this event for Spanish to English and English to Spanish. This feature in your Zoom meeting controls can be accessed again with that interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom window next to a globe icon. So please select the language that you would prefer to listen to this event in. I would like to begin today by recognizing with you that Nonviolent Peace Force is doing our protection work in what is now called the United States on traditional Dakota and Anishinaabe lands, as well as on traditional Lenape land. We make this acknowledgement to honor these peoples, ancestors and descendants, past and present, the land itself, and the deeply interconnected relationships of Indigenous peoples with the land, water, and air as their stewards. However, we know that land acknowledgements and marking Earth Day once a year are not enough if they are not accompanied by action that meaningfully supports Indigenous-led environmental defense. And to talk more about that today, we are joined by Francisca Stuardo from Global Witness, Jacob Omar Jeronimo, Indigenous land activist, and Emily Green from Community Peacemaker Teams. From their range of organizations, communities, and contexts, the panelists will speak about their work to protect the land we live on, facing violent conflict as a result, and using tools of unarmed civilian protection to stay safe. 2020 marked the deadliest year on record to be an environmental defender. As reported by Global Witness, 227 environmental and land defenders, many of them Indigenous, were murdered as a result of defending their land, their resources, and the planet. While we await the report from 2021, we already know some sources are showing that more than half of activists killed in 2021 were land and environment defenders. As the climate crisis worsens and communities mobilize against threat to their land and livelihoods, the protection needs of frontline communities and activists are escalating rapidly. You and I know climate change is a crisis multiplier. The way that climate crisis erodes our physical environment quickly cascades into an erosion of human security, climate threats compounding conflict, conflict impeding responses to climate, and amidst it all, civilians struggling with an onslaught of threats to their safety, well-being, and livelihoods. In this deadly cycle we live in, it is absolutely imperative that environmental defenders are protected. At Nonviolent Peace Force, we've been exploring how peace builders, unarmed civilian protectors, and activists can invest in this protection. For decades, we've been using unarmed civilian protection to work side by side with communities as they keep themselves safe. While you might think of our work being used explicitly to protect from direct violence in conflict zones, we know that climate change, conflict, and the protection of civilians are intimately connected. We provide protection in South Sudan to keep children safe from drowning or addressing sexual and gender-based violence during intense flooding worsened by the climate crisis. Also, during the Indigenous-led protest movement at Standing Rock, we held space for open dialogues and we trained communities on providing protective accompaniment, particular for water protectors. Organizations and communities around the world, Colombia, Philippines, Guatemala, and the United States are using these methods in teams and individually to protect one another. In the words of Indigenous Guatemalan defender Omar Jeronimo, accompaniment in Guatemala saves lives. My hope today is that the stories Francisca, Jacob, and Emily share with us will give you a window into how protection and accompaniment not only saves lives, but also in our planet. And thank you all so much for joining. And another reminder in the chat to please select the language that you would like to listen to this event in. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Francisca Stuardo from Global Witness, the leading organization on data collection relating to abuses and deadly violence against environmental defenders. Francisca has worked extensively with civil society organizations and defenders across regions and is a member of the team working on the Global Witness annual report. So Francisca, thank you again for joining us. Could you please help us understand the scale of threats that environmental defenders face?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having us and giving us the opportunity to talk about such a critical topic. And I will share my screen. Hopefully you just let me know if you can see it properly. So can you see it okay?
Yes, it is showing up. Thank you so much, Francisca.
Right. Sorry. It's just okay. So yeah, we have I'm glad to speak to you about like the work we do from Global Witness, collecting data to raise awareness about the affecting land and environmental defenders. First of all, I would like to talk a bit about who are land and environmental defenders for us. We have quite a broad definition of defenders because we understand that everyone can stand up for their land, the environment, their traditions, their common goods, and regardless of the space they are or like the position they're taking. We believe that people can come from civil society organizations supporting grassroots defenders and communities on risk, lawyers, politicians, park rangers, even journalists communicating these stories and standing up for these voices can become environmental defenders. So for us, this definition is quite broad, but because we understand that people from different backgrounds can stand at the forefront of this climate crisis and are standing at the forefront of this climate crisis. So we started in 2012 recording killings against land and environmental defenders, and now we're gonna finalize our 10th report in September 2022. But we have covered data from 2012 until 2020, which is the data we have available. As you can see with the dots, the attacks have been increasing over the years, and that happens for different reasons. One of them is that people are recognizing more cases, but also because of other aspects I will talk to you about later on. But in 2020, we saw that Colombia and generally Latin America remains as the most dangerous region to become a land and environmental defender. It has been consistently the region with more killings registered ever since we started with this data collection process. So, and first the Colombia appears with with 65 killings, and it's the second time that Colombia in a row that Colombia becomes the first country. Then Mexico took the second position, and violence used to be less, but there was a spark in violence in the country, and we reflected that in our data. Same as the Philippines, it has remained as one of the most dangerous countries for defenders. And then Brazil and Honduras have been consistently pointed out as very different, difficult contexts to defend human rights, but also the environment. And then if we look at the drivers, we cannot say the causes because we don't really have enough information, but we can talk about the drivers of these attacks, and they're linked to resource exploitation as logging, mining, large-scale agriculture, even water and dams are appearing as drivers for violence, which determines and tell us that regardless of the sector, it's the way business are being done so far. It's not the sector itself, but it's like the way companies behave responsibly, causing harms and attacks and linking and being these underlying cause for attacks against defenders. Then we acknowledge that this data only shows part of the reality because we lack of public information, and impunity also fuels these attacks and become big obstacles to showcase the dimension of this crisis. We understand that if we don't have access to public records, it's very difficult for us to do any data collection or even to do a comparative study. We don't really have enough information. And also impunity doesn't really give us the right to the access to information and to really understand what happened, because most of this process remain in impunity. So we have ideas of what happened, but we don't have certainties of what happens with all of these defenders. And very often, they advocate for more than one cause. So it's very difficult to point out to just one cause on these cases. And also, this violence is just the tip of the iceberg, because it's not the only way this violence expresses. It's the most dangerous one, and actually deadly attacks are the biggest. But they come from a myriad of attacks that include harassment, smearing campaigns, surveillance, sexual violence, and many other forms of violence, and that touches people's lives in different ways depending on where they come and what kind of defenders they are, in which country they are. For instance, women are more likely to face sexual violence or attacks to their families. Indigenous people are more likely to become victims of institutional racism, and people from grassroots community many times don't really have that much access to public offices, so they don't really have access to protection system, and if they do, they're quite vague. So they're likely to suffer from harassment, from surveillance, even from physical attacks that remain impune. This is one of the cases that we featured in our latest report, is the case of Piquille in South Africa. She was more than a defender. She was a teacher, a mother, a leader. She understood what was going on, and that's what happens when women stand up for their territories. They become more than just one leader. They become like a key part and a key component for their communities. And then she was opposing to a project called Dendele, which is a coal mine, and that's placed in the border with one of the oldest not native reserves in Africa. And the attacks escalated, and she started wondering why people had to suffer from the causes and like the effects of the mine, and having their walls cracked, smelling and suffering from diseases that came from all of the dust, having their water polluted because of the chemics. So she started standing up, and then she stood up for her community. Her community started supporting her, and when she became this leader, she started receiving threats and attacks, until one day in October 2020, she was attacked by, sorry. Can you see my screen again?
Yes, you're good.
And she was attacked and murdered at her place. This case hasn't been resolved yet, and even the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the mine. So it gives us a sense of what's happening in there. And then the other case is a case from Colombia, from Angélica Ortiz. Is a case that we also featured in one of our reports in 2020. And Angélica is an indigenous woman from the Wayuu community. She lives in La Guajira, which is in the border between Colombia and Venezuela. And Angélica was part of a larger community of Wayuu people standing up against another mine, which is one of the biggest open pit mines. And Angélica was standing up for her territory, her land, her traditions as an indigenous people, because they have this link to what they call the Mother Earth, the big house. And she started receiving many types of threats, and she has suffered from being separated from her family because they cannot stay in the same place due to the risks that she's facing. She has been under surveillance. She has had drones flying up on her house. And ever since she started working on this, she has faced so many risks that now her community doesn't really want to be with her sometimes, because they believe that when she's around, danger is also there. So she started taking part in this global campaign, and even if the court has ruled in their favor, the company owned by Anglo-American and Glencore is still working in there. And now they actually want to redirect the stream Bruno for their convenience, which is the main source of water in that desertic land. So I included this quote just to show and demonstrate that these threats are not only these deadly threats, but also any types of violence to silence their voices. And for the territories, they're also being stripped apart of their territories, their traditions, their land, and the political will is not supporting them. They're even being attacked by the public discourse, and that's why it's so important to stand up with them and raise their voice and elevate their voices. So to sum up, we see that these irresponsible businesses as logging, mining, not all of them, but many of them, too many of them, unfortunately, as logging, mining, large-scale agriculture, they're not only destroying our planet, but as they do that, they're driving attacks against defenders. And that's why, and not only defenders, but also they bring very quick shifts to local and social dynamics. They change these dynamics, and this violence is taking too many steps and is harming these communities, dividing families, and as many people believe that they're profiting from these companies, because they're accessing to jobs, and they're getting quote unquote the benefits of working with these companies. At the same time, they're just buying their tickets to an unknown future because of all the pollution and all of the and how destroyed the land has becomes in those territories. So this is an invitation. We cannot wait. We must act now. We need to listen to defenders, understand why and what they're standing up for, and support their voices, recognize the importance of their role, because they're key for our democracies and for our sustainability, and ultimately for our future. They're standing up for the water we drink, for the air we breathe, and for the land we stand in. And so there's no future if we cannot protect defenders.
Thank you so much, Francisca. I especially liked how you reminded us that environmental defenders that is not their only title, and they hold so much else in this world as well. Thank you so much. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Indigenous land activist, Jacob Omar Jeronimo. Would you please share with us, Jacob, how communities use unarmed civilian protection tools to keep environmental defenders safe in Guatemala and Colombia?
Sí. Buenos días. Soy de Guatemala y soy maya chortí de una población que está entre Guatemala y Honduras, y es una de las territorios que más impacto sufre por el cambio climático. Es un territorio donde hay mucha desnutrición, que es uno de los problemas sociales muy fuertes en Guatemala. Y acá tenemos unos bosques que hemos protegido por cientos de años, y también por la misma paisaje es muy rico en minerales. Pero por estar en la frontera entre Honduras y Guatemala, también tiene muchísimas dificultades de seguridad. Y ahora mismo la región en general está sufriendo una crisis en sus instituciones del Estado. Podemos decir que la institución del Estado tiene una relación muy estrecha con la industria extractivista y el crimen organizado. Y estas tres actores ponen en riesgo la vida de los defensores y las defensoras de la tierra, y especialmente de los pueblos indígenas que estamos defendiendo la tierra. Y defender la tierra es defender la vida. Y defender la vida es defender también a los defensores de la tierra, a la población indígena, que es fundamental en este momento de cambio en el mundo. No voy a hablar de todos los proyectos que están ahora mismo en el territorio, sino de las prácticas del pueblo chortí como un defensor colectivo de derechos humanos, como un defensor colectivo del medio ambiente, para poder enfrentar todas esas acciones violentas y de criminalización que enfrentamos no solo en Guatemala, sino en muchas partes de América Latina, donde está ahora mismo en una franca lucha entre los que quieren seguir destruyendo el planeta para acumular riquezas y los que la queremos proteger para tener un futuro. Dicho eso, es importante también decir que los pueblos indígenas por cientos de años hemos optado por tener un sinfín de prácticas de defensa de nuestra tierra pacíficamente, acciones pacíficas. Y estas acciones pacíficas son muy importantes que el mundo las proteja, las alimente y las fortalezca. Y acá es donde esta es una práctica muy importante para el pueblo chortí, pero también para los pueblos indígenas, y son las ceremonias. Estas ceremonias tienen el sentido de que nosotros como personas podamos integrarnos a la madre tierra, nos podamos integrar al planeta. Y esa integración en el cual somos una sola entre la tierra y las personas es fundamental para entender por qué es necesario defenderla. Por eso esta práctica ceremonial de hablar con la madre tierra, de preguntarle cómo son las formas de protegerla, son prácticas realmente no violentas de protección y defensa de la tierra. Así es fundamental hacer la lectura. Esta es una reunión luego de las ceremonias hay reuniones de las autoridades indígenas para definir entonces sus acciones administrativas y de gobernanza territorial. Esas acciones administrativas pueden ser demandar a una empresa ante los tribunales, levantar su voz, hacer acciones de movilización pacífica, pedir acompañamiento a instancias internacionales para que verifiquen en el terreno qué les está sucediendo y se pueda hacer una denuncia. Estoy mostrando fotos muy recientes realmente. Esta es una foto, estas son fotografías del día de ayer. El día de ayer han salido de la cárcel dos autoridades indígenas. Es el hermano que está de verde y el hermano de camisa azul. En medio está una de las autoridades indígenas joven realmente, haciendo una lectura de un comunicado en el cual están diciendo por qué estaban en la cárcel estos hermanos y cómo los está recibiendo la comunidad el día de ayer. Ellos estuvieron en la cárcel 9 años porque no quisieron vender sus tierras a una empresa que quería construir una hidroeléctrica. Y ellos desde la cárcel constantemente mandaban mensajes diciendo, nosotros estamos siendo amenazados por la empresa en la cárcel, nos dicen que nos dejan salir de la cárcel si vendemos nuestra tierra, pero nosotros les llamamos a ustedes, a las comunidades, para que si nosotros tenemos que morir en la cárcel, ustedes sigan defendiendo la madre tierra porque es la vida de nuestros hijos. Esos mensajes son fundamentales porque estamos hablando del futuro de la humanidad, no el futuro de los hijos de dos activistas o de una comunidad indígena que no conocemos. No, estamos hablando de la humanidad. Cuando hablamos de derechos humanos, cuando hablamos de defender los derechos humanos, estamos hablando de la humanidad, no estamos hablando de una persona. Y estos son diálogos en diciembre del 2021, en la cual las comunidades nos piden a los que hemos logrado ir a una escuela, a una universidad, que lleguemos a explicar los mecanismos legales que podrían utilizarse a pesar de la corrupción de las instituciones del Estado, si existen todavía mecanismos que se pueden usar para seguir defendiendo nuestra identidad, nuestra cultura y nuestras tierras. Y acá tenemos una asamblea sobre el diálogo del convenio 169 y cómo esto puede ser usado en los tribunales guatemaltecos, colombianos, nicaragüenses, hondureños. Quería hacer un repaso de estas fotografías rápido para decir algo muy básico. Y es que las organizaciones de acompañamiento a las comunidades, a los defensores y las defensoras, tienen un papel fundamental. Y es que cuando nosotros tenemos acompañamiento de una instancia afuera de nuestra comunidad, nosotros sentimos esperanza y sentimos compañía. Sentimos compañía porque pensamos que afuera de nosotros también la humanidad está pensando que es necesario proteger la vida y la tierra. Y sentimos esperanza porque cuando habemos más defensores y defensoras en el mundo que interactuamos, que conversamos, hay posibilidades de poder cambiar esa visión de desarrollo que solo nos trae violencia y destrucción. Pero también fortalece el pensamiento de que todas esas acciones no violentas, que no necesitan armas, son muchísimo más poderosas que las acciones violentas que las empresas extractivistas, que el Estado puede ejercer contra nosotros. y ese es un mensaje fundamental para decir que hay que fortalecernos aún más en nuestras redes de derechos humanos a nivel global. Muchas gracias.
And thank you so much, Jacob. I think you did a really great job for us explaining also the connection between humanity and our future and Mother Earth. So thank you so much. And last but not least, allow me to introduce Community Peacemaker Teams representative Emily Green, who has been working in solidarity with Wet'suwet'en communities on unceded Wet'suwet'en territory. Emily, would you please share your experience with how unarmed civilian protection is being used to protect Indigenous community leaders opposing a multi-billion-dollar pipeline project in Northern British Columbia, Canada?
Great, thank you so much. It's really good to be here. I really appreciate hearing both from Francisca and Jacob. And I'm really glad to be able to share with you from my experiences. I'm going to be talking with you today about my work with the Community Peacemaker Teams, and I'm going to tell you a bit about our organization. Then I'm going to tell you about why we do work in Turtle Island or in the US and Canada, what that work is about. And then I'm really going to focus my presentation on telling you about the Wet'suwet'en land defense and their struggle and their incredible resistance. And if there's time, I'm going to close by talking a little bit about the Community Peacemaker Teams model of solidarity. So to begin, this organization is about 35 years old, and our work is about dismantling systems of oppression and transforming violence. Oh, I've just lost my slideshow, just a moment. Yeah, I can't multitask quite so much. All right, and then the Turtle Island Solidarity Network is a network of trained volunteers who work with Christian peacemaker teams in solidarity with Indigenous land defense struggles. And our work is really about solidarity and about decolonization, finding ways to end settler colonialism. And we do that in a number of ways. And I just wanted to share like some of the process of what brought me into that team in particular. I think sometimes it's just a really common phenomena in settler colonial context to be really looking elsewhere and to be thinking, oh, it's way worse over there. Like, oh, it's really bad over there. And to for example, like in my life as an anti-Zionist Jewish person, I was very focused for many years on Palestine solidarity work and looking at the violence of settler colonialism overseas. And there's this term, scholar Jeff Corntassel, I think might be the one who coined this. I'm going to give a definition in a moment. This idea of the free Tibet syndrome, which says the problem's over there, here things are peaceful, you know? And so the free Tibet syndrome is a way of looking far away from one's localized responsibilities, disguising or diminishing the violence of the local circumstances. And so for myself, doing this work in solidarity with Indigenous peoples in the nation state where I am is part of bringing my awareness to the systems that I am embedded in, that I am part of, that I benefit from, and to really actively try to end those systems or to challenge them or to transform them. And so that is the work of the Turtle Island Solidarity Network. We are committed to undoing settler colonialism. I'm going to define that in a moment. We're also very committed to Indigenous solidarity through actions, events, accompaniment, advocacy, and we try to do settler education. So I'm imagining many people in this webinar today are settlers. We're not indigenous to the land where we are living. Our ancestors were not indigenous to the land where we're living. And in the power structures of the system, we're benefiting. And we also do coalition building as a network. And so it's good to be able to work together with different groups like today. All right, so just a quick definition. What is settler colonialism? I keep using that word. It's one form of colonialism where the incoming settlers from the colonial core, in this case, Europe, Britain, France, attempt to replace the colonized population. So rather than colonize for resources, colonization occurs also for settlement, which makes it necessary to continually dispossess the indigenous peoples of their land, of their water, of their cultures. And it's a structure, it's not an event. So some people think colonization happened in the past, but it's actually ongoing. It exists through systems. For example, the legal system, the education system. It's perpetuated by media and many other systems. Okay, so that was some background. I hope that didn't overwhelm you with jargon. Now I'm going to bring us to the Wet'suwet'en territory. And this map shows the proposed energy corridor, which, as you see from this red square, would like to pass through the Wet'suwet'en traditional territory. And it never will. This is 22,000 kilometers of indigenous territory that has never been surrendered. There's never been any treaty signed to give any right to the Canadian settler colonial state. And in fact, in 1999, there was, I believe in the 90s, there was a legal decision in the Canadian courts that said this territory is under the jurisdiction of the Wet'suwet'en people. And that was affirmed by the colonial court system. And so there is really no doubt that this is indigenous territory. So maybe you're in the United States and British Columbia is a province that you're not familiar with. Here is just another map to give you a sense. And it's on the West Coast, but actually doesn't touch the coast. This proposed energy corridor has so much push behind it because they want to bring oil and gas to Kitimat, which is a city on the coast. They've already invested billions of dollars into a processing plant where they would take the so-called natural gas, condense it, put it into shipping containers and ship it overseas to the continent of Asia, where that oil and gas would be used for manufacturing goods, which ultimately would be sold to consumer markets in Europe and North America. So this is part of a broader geopolitical vision and part of a trade agreement called the Trans-Pacific Prosperity Partnership, I believe is the name. I might have that a little off. Okay, so that's some background on why this pipeline is being pushed so hard. Oh, I seem to be having, there we go. Oh, okay. My slides are taking a moment. So there's been incredible resistance to this. Oh, nope. Okay, we're going through the slides. There's been incredible resistance to this, and including from the hereditary chiefs. And so the hereditary chiefs are, have been the governing power on this territory for millennia. And they unanimously say no to all pipelines through their territory. They say this will pollute our water, This could disrupt our trapping lines. And this is just something we absolutely do not consent to. And so the hereditary chiefs are saying, no, the band council government has sometimes said, yeah, we're on board with this, but the band council government was put in place by the Canadian state under the Indian Act, and they do not have jurisdiction over this land. This is what's being protected. I had the honor of visiting last summer with the the Community Peacemaker Teams. We just changed our name in January. And yeah, I had the honor of drinking directly from this water. It's glacial fed. You can go to the river and cup your hand and drink from the water. It's absolutely incredible. This is some of the violence that has already happened on the territory. They have clear cut a huge tract of land right up to the river. And then they tried to bring in their drill to drill under the river. And they have not been able to do that because the land defenders and the water defenders, they set up a blockade again at this site. This is Frida Houston. She's the Healing Center spokesperson. The Unistoten Healing Center is one of the ways that the Wet'suwet'en people are taking a stance and creating a new vision for a better future. The Healing Center, where I was able to visit for a month with Community Peacemaker Teams, is a beautiful place of resistance and cultural revitalization. They're teaching their language. They have people, they are creating a center for people who struggle with mental health and with addictions issues to come and connect with the land and connect with their traditional healing methods, and to find a place that is culturally alive and that is spiritually alive. And so it's really quite a powerful place. They're also using or engaging in spiritual practices in their resistance. This is Carla, who is a psychologist and Unistoten resistor. She's the niece of Frida, daughter of Brenda, and is an incredibly powerful human. And here you can see the Canadian state forces arresting her during this resistance moment of a blockade site at the river. And so the blockade was taken down. These are CGL, or the Coastal GasLink vehicles moving through the territory. And I'm going to wrap up shortly because I know I'm at time, but this is an ongoing struggle. Coastal GasLink continues to try to develop their project on the site. Just as Francisca mentioned earlier, these so-called development projects disproportionately affect women. These are red dresses that represent the missing and murdered Indigenous women, which is something that was, there was actually just a report in 2019 talking about this problem. It's another form of genocidal violence where Indigenous women are not only targeted for sexual violence, but also the Canadian police do not do adequate investigation into those missing and murdered women. And so these dresses represent that. And the Unistoten and the Wet'suwet'en people understand that with man camps, which is the official term for the work sites of the oil and gas pipeline, comes increased violence against their women. And so this is part of their way of making a stance. And okay, I just want to close on this note. So this is Doris, who is one of the matriarchs of the Utnastoten, which is one of the family groups within the Wet'suwet'en Nation. And here she was telling us about the power of the river. And she brought us, like, we were walking together by the river, and she invited us to close our eyes and put our hands up to the river and to feel the presence of the river. And this is something that for me, like, socialized as someone who's not Indigenous here, it's hard for me to really imagine and understand the land as alive, as having its own presence. And so in inviting us to do this, I could imagine what it was to experience that water as sacred and as alive. And it was really powerful. And I'm just so grateful to the Wet'suwet'en people for their incredible resistance, and also for teaching me so much about the possibility of living differently and living in a way that does, like, as Jacob was saying, understand these struggles as not just about this moment in time, not just about that particular part of the earth, but actually understanding it beyond that as part of like protecting future generations, both of Indigenous peoples and of settler people, like of our people, because we're all impacted by the climate crisis, and that climate crisis is caused by this way of being, I believe, of being, you know, without real deep relationship to the land we're on. And I think that there's just so much work to do, and also so much to be gained from continuing in these struggles. So thank you so much for listening to my stories, and I look forward to engaging in some questions and conversations together. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Emily. Yes, I invite everybody to please share your questions in the chat. I definitely was noticing the thread between the three of you, how much work there really is to be done. And, you know, as we come to almost the end of our time, it really is a reminder why Earth Day, you know, isn't just enough. Like, this really is around the clock, and we are doing so much work. You three are doing such amazing work. Thank you so much. And it looks like we do have one question in the chat from Gilda. Can you please share any specific examples on how unarmed civilian protection is assisting land defenders and these movements to protect the land? If any of you three would like to jump in and please reply. Thank you.
I could reply to that, but I also feel like I was just speaking so much. If Francisca and Jacob aren't ready, I could go, but do either of you feel? Okay, I'll go. I'll start. I'll begin. Yeah, so in the community peacemaker teams, we actually don't use the word protection in this context. And so that's just a little semantic thing, but we do use the language of solidarity. And so right now, actually, in this present moment, the Wet'suwet'en people are really urgently calling for supporters to come and get boots on the ground. The reason they are calling for that is because they continue to face harassment and violence from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police or the federal police force. And by getting our boots on the ground, we join them in saying they aren't alone in this struggle. Globally, we are watching this struggle. right before pandemic came to this continent in January 2020, if you remember that, it's a blur, there was an uprising across the continent, mostly of indigenous people, blockading infrastructure, blockading railways and highways, and setting up solidarity rallies across the continent. And that is powerful. The more we show that they are not alone, the more their movement has power. And that the more spiritually also that they feel emboldened and strengthened in their resistance. And so in our solidarity model, we're showing up not to protect them, but to show that we are united in this struggle, that this struggle affects all of us, and that that these movements are powerful, and that it's not just about that one little square of land, you know, it's actually about our futures as humans, you know. And so, yeah, and I think that the more we do that, the more they can have the possibility to use tactics that aren't desperate, you know. Yeah, that they can use tactics that have spiritual power as well as political power.
Thank you, Emily. Francisca, would you like to add on to that as well?
Yeah, I would like to switch to Spanish to answer this question. Creo que hay un componente que es muy importante en la protección, y es el componente también colectivo. Si miramos a las políticas públicas, hay una brecha muy importante entre cómo la política pública ve la protección de las personas defensoras y cómo las comunidades ven la protección y qué es lo que les permite sentirse seguras. Y entonces creo que lo primero es a nivel territorial. Los sistemas colectivos tienden a ser mucho más eficientes, y yo creo que Jacob quizás ahí podría tener mucho más elementos que yo para referirse a eso, porque vemos también que hoy día los mecanismos de protección institucionales son deficientes, no tienen financiamiento, se enfocan en la individualidad, no necesariamente tienen una mirada interseccional. Entonces, por ejemplo, hacen que mujeres que están siendo víctimas de violencia por parte de las fuerzas policiales, que se ven amenazadas, que han sido parte, o sea, víctimas de violencia sexual o de acoso, por ejemplo, después tengan que acogerse a los mecanismos en donde esas mismas figuras policiales son las que las tienen que proteger, y han sido sus perpetradoras. Entonces, finalmente, las comunidades deberían dictar cómo se esboza una protección que sea colectiva, que tenga en cuenta la mirada interseccional, que tenga en cuenta las tradiciones y las culturas que están en juego y que están al frente, porque no es lo mismo una comunidad urbana que una comunidad rural, una comunidad campesina que una comunidad indígena, y al respecto creo que lo mejor, al menos en la región, en América Latina, creo que la experiencia que podemos conseguir desde las comunidades organizadas y quizás desde las miradas institucionales ahora con el acuerdo de Escazú son grandes oportunidades, y creo que son grandes referencias para poder pensar en una protección. Y creo que además, como decía Emily, el reconocimiento de las personas, entender que su rol es clave, que no son terroristas, que no son personas que no quieren el desarrollo, sino que quieren un desarrollo que esté en sintonía con sus valores, que esté en sintonía con sus tradiciones. Creo que son algunas claves para entender una protección que sea sostenible en el tiempo. Y que no sea solo una protección, sino que les permita vivir también sus proyectos de vida de manera integral.
Thank you so much, Francisca. And thank you really to all of our panelists, Francisca Stuardo from Global Witness, Jacob Omar Jeronimo, Indigenous land activist who wears many hats. The Land Coalition org link is in the chat so you can see more of that. And then Emily Green from Community Peacemaker Teams. We do have a list of resources to check out those organizations and some more of their incredible work and how to support them. So please do click that link. And thank you so much to all of the attendees for taking the time today. We were getting some more questions in the chat, and we will be sure to reach back out to you if we can and continue the conversation. This is a strong reminder for me that when Nonviolent Peace Force advocates in international fora, we advocate not for Nonviolent Peace Force, the organization, but really for unarmed civilian protection at large. For Nonviolent Peace Force alone, it takes $26 million a year to work side by side with communities building peace around the world. Your support means people have the tools to engage in conflict and protection without violence. It means we can build resiliency in communities dealing with the most violent impacts of climate change. You and I know from our own experiences in our own communities, from the news and from this group here today, how much this work truly is needed now more than ever. And then we've put a link in the chat if you would like to make a gift to Nonviolent Peace Force today. Thank you so much for your generosity and support. And then another ask from you, we would love to hear from you. We have a survey in the chat as well. We want to hear more if you have questions, if you have comments, we would love to continue the conversation with you all. And thank you so much again for your support of unarmed civilian protection and working in solidarity for protecting those who protect the land. Thank you all and have a great rest of your Thursday. And yes, we will be emailing the links and the recording as well. If you haven't signed up for our email list, please do so at nonviolentpeaceforce.org, and you can receive all of the invites for upcoming events as well. Thank you all.
Thank you for having us today. Have a lovely day. And lovely to meet you, Jacob, Emily, Hilda, Claire.